with a few welcoming remarks. Then we will have a poll, and then we will have a round table on the clusters and their role in participation and representation of local stakeholders in coordination structures. And then we will have a question and answer session of 30 minutes. And finally, some conclusions. Without further ado, let me now give the floor to Michelle Brown on the next slide, obviously. The coordinator of Global Education Cluster, Michelle. I think there is an issue with this link. She might be a tad late. Oh, okay. Well, I can maybe continue with a few welcoming remarks while we wait for Michelle or who knows Liliane. I am Julie Barra, coordinator, deputy coordinator at the global level. I'm based in Geneva. And this webinar is part of a working group on localization work from the global cluster group, education, food safety, protection, and so on and so forth. And we are gathered here today in order to promote localization. We've had several webinars. The first one was in Arabic, and this one is now in French. Localization is to us a key element when it comes to coordination. For a very long time, we mainly focused on international stakeholders and UN agencies to ensure coordination in humanitarian questions. But for a few years now, and since we started with the Great Bargain, we realized we need to localize as much as possible to have better humanitarian response. And so this is why we wanted to hold this meeting. I have been told that Liliane from DRC is online and she could take the floor to say hi. So Liliane, are you there? Hello, Jennifer. Hello, everyone.
Allez-y, Liliane, si vous voulez nous faire quelques mots de bienvenue.
So if you wish, you can start this webinar and say a few welcoming words. Over to you. Thank you so much. You've already said my name. I am Liliane. I come from DRC. I represent the program leading team, and I want to say that my organization is honored to be part of this webinar on localization through coordination mechanisms in humanitarian questions. So sorry, I have a cold. So we've been working in DRC for over 18 years time, and we are honored, as I have said, to have the possibility to share our experience on our work in this context. And we are anchored on the ground and have been working with women and girls in humanitarian contexts to reduce risks, to face different challenges, to improve representation, and we use several tools which allow us to consolidate our web with youngsters, with boys, girls, women, and men on the ground, so that, well, we can work more efficiently with the different structures and gather data. What are you saying? What's happening? Please continue. Go ahead, Liliane. We do hear you loud and clear. Oh, well, thank you. Sorry, that's about it. Thank you. So we are also a women organization, and we are taking part in the building of feminist movements in DRC. We want to be on the front line when we want to fight humanitarian crisis. We mobilize several women and have some money to make initiatives operational with sister organizations led by women again. On humanitarian coordination, we have had to work with
des clusters
subclusters
sectoriels
and industry
concentrant
clusters
sur la protection
in our working
des
group
enfants.
to protect children.
Nous sommes toujours honorés de
And we are,
participer
well, honored to
à
be
répondre
part
favorablement aux
of
invitations
initiatives
engagées par les
and
différents publics
meetings.
où nous intervenons sur les
We
secteurs
intervene with our working group
parce
on
que, comme on le sait,
sectoral
les
evaluations. As you may know,
populations de ces
DRC
pays ne cessent de connaître de crise en crise
is
et de
facing
crise
many
en crise
crises.
parmi d'autres crises.
Uh,
Ainsi, si nous
and
faisons des
as a
évaluations
consequence,
sectorielles
we do need
régulières,
to
nous
monitor and evaluate
identifions
everything
des besoins
so that,
spécifiques de
well,
femmes
we
filles
can identify the specific
avec
needs
la
of women
défense
and
de l'aide
girls so that,
humanitaire.
well, we can provide better humanitarian response.
Nous avons beaucoup de bonnes pratiques
We
avec
have quite a
le
lot of good
subcluster
practices with
au
the
niveau de
WGB
notre pays. Au-delà
subcluster in our
des
country.
évaluations sectorielles, comme je le
Beyond
disais,
the sectoral
de la participation
evaluations, we
dans
do have
des
good
réunions
practices. We take
d'évaluation
part in evaluation
des
meetings.
subventions
What's
pour
more,
des projets au niveau
we can fund some projects, as I have
au niveau
also said,
national avec le fonds
and we do this
humanitaire
at the national
et
level with the
aussi la
humanitarian fund.
participation à
And
l'évaluation et
we
élaboration
also take part in the
stratégique
evaluation
dont
and
les
the
concepts
drafting
s'adressent à
of
nous. Je pense
strategic
ma
documents.
petite
Let me finish
introduction
this small introduction by saying
justement avec
that
les organisations féministes
the
dans les
women
zones conflictuelles.
organization are
Elles y
deeply
sont
anchored in
pendant et la
communities.
crise
They are there
pendant et après
before,
la crise.
during, and after
Elles sont
crisis and try to
servies
make do
pour
with the
apporter des
means they have at
partenaires, de bons
disposal.
partenaires dans la
They are
résolution
good
des crises
partners,
globales. Mais dans
trusted
le fond,
partners to
elles ont quand même des
face
difficultés
crisis.
techniques et
But
financières
this being said, there
pour
are
ça.
technical and
Nous
financial
encourageons
limitations to their
différentes
work.
pratiques pour
We
soutenir les
encourage
efforts
different
techniques et
initiatives
financiers
which
afin de
aim at
renforcer leur
improving
capacité.
financial and technical
Et il y
means
a
in order
certaines
to improve their
responsabilités
work.
entre les organisations
And let me
féministes
also
avec
say
d'autres pays.
that
Et je dirais
some
que
women
parfois,
organizations tend to think
l'efficacité
they
des
are weak,
relations,
others
les
tend to
femmes
think they are a
peuvent
bit stronger, but it is
bâtir
through
pour
networks
être
that they
plus
can
forts
build
dans la
something
réponse humanitaire.
stronger to provide even stronger
Merci.
answers to
Enfin, nous avons
humanitarian
évidemment
crisis.
le
Finally,
DGB, le sous-cluster pour toutes les
let
activités
me say
d'affirmation
that I want
avec
to
les
thank the
organisations féminines. Nous
subcluster
félicitons les
who
organisations
has
pour que les efforts
invited
soient
a women
extrêmement
organization
significatifs
to be
et
part of this.
responsabilisés dans les
And
différentes
thank you for
coordinations
making us more
pour bien pouvoir
responsible and
influencer toutes
for
les femmes d'entendre
funding
la voix
the mechanism and for me
en
making
crise.
women voices
Merci.
heard whenever there are humanitarian crises. Thank you very much, Lilian. This is very important indeed, and we will talk about this during the whole webinar. Without further ado, let's move on to the poll so that we know who you are, where you're from. Shiva, could you launch the poll, please? So, with which cluster do you mainly work? So you'll have a few seconds left. Do you all have access to this poll? The second question is now if the coordination meetings in your cluster are in French or in English, knowing that our working language here for all of us is French. So please put the poll on the screen. That's what you said. Didn't you see a window pop up? Not for the second question. Well, it should be just below. You need to scroll down. You need to scroll down on the tiny window. So don't you see the question? Because I see that several people have answered to the second question. Yes, you need to scroll down.
Parce que j'ai déjà plus de 30 réponses sur la deuxième question.
I have over 30 answers on this question. I too have provided my answer. Okay, well, I haven't seen that. Where is it exactly?
C'est quelque chose qui apparaît devant votre écran automatiquement.
It should simply pop up on your screen. But it doesn't pop up on my screen. It doesn't pop up on my screen either. I have clicked on the first answer, it has left, and this ship has sailed. They have answered to the first question, but without scrolling down. And so they haven't answered the second question. They didn't know.
D'accord, c'est rien. Je pense qu'on a déjà beaucoup de réponses et
Well,
excusez-moi.
I think we already have quite a lot of answers, so it's not a major issue, even though we have a tiny technical issue here at hand. Anyhow, so let's have a look at the different answers. Do you see the answers to this poll? Yes. As you can see, we have colleagues from education, others from food safety, many people from protection, some people from water, hygiene. And then we have some on children and some on gender-based violence. And most people have said that their working language for their meetings was French. Meaning that people mainly stem from sub-Saharan French-speaking countries. Well, look, we'll keep this in mind, obviously, and we'll keep this for information. And let's now move on to the next part of this meeting, and I will give the floor to Alexis Chetod, National Coordinator of the Information System for Food Safety and Early Alert in Chat. Mr. Chetod, over to you.
Alexis, vous êtes dans ligne?
Alexis, are you there?
Hey,
Ah,
est-ce que vous
bonjour.
m'écoutez?
Oui, là, ça va. On vous
Bonjour.
entend.
Do you hear me? Yes, now we do. Over to you, sir.
Oui, par rapport à la présentation,
So on this presentation, yes.
voilà la présentation du
So this is
Tchad,
my presentation, the presentation of
nous avons
Chad.
les leadership,
We have
le ministère,
leadership,
en charge
the Ministry of
est le
Agriculture,
co-facilitateur de la
which is a
coordination
co-facilitator of the national
dans
cluster
toutes
coordination.
les
This
activités
ministry
de
takes
réunions
part in
sectorielles.
all sectoral
Les
activities
coordonnateurs
and gatherings.
des
The
trois
sub-cluster
secteurs
coordinators
humanitaires
for the three humanitarian
et
hubs
l'information
and the country information manager
nationaux.
are people
La
from Chad,
coordination nationale
nationals.
et
The
régionale
national
des
and
services
regional coordination of the humanitarian nexus, the nexus for humanitarian development and
S'agissant des participations et représentations,
peace is placed under the government leadership. Then when it comes to participation and representation, we have an active participation of national NGOs in provincial and national humanitarian programming cycle workshops. What's more, 40% of NGOs report the 5 Ws on a monthly basis to
au cluster,
the cluster.
des ONG nationales,
The national NGOs and the
pourvoyeurs
state
d'informations
technical services
et services techniques,
are part of the technical working
dans les
groups.
groupes techniques de travail. Nous avons groupe
We have several groups.
de travail. Nous avons la
We have a group on prevention, and exploitation. We have a group on sexual abuses. We have a group on gender. We have a working group on early actions. We have a working group on the harmonized framework. And then next slide, we have a contingency plan and a harmonized framework. This is very useful to fight acute malnourishment. And on the contingency plan, we have joint field mission with the state technical structures in order to be part of emergency preparedness efforts. We also play a role of leader in the collection, analysis, and confirmation of data used in humanitarian decision-making processes from technical government bodies such as INSEAD, IRAT, and CSAP, all of which are part of the Ministry of Agriculture and other ministries. Then we also work on lifelong learning and capacity building on cross-cutting themes: HIV, gender-based violence, PSCA, gender, inclusion, monitoring and evaluation. We also work on improving capacities for reporting on funding, on lobbying and advocacy, communication, advocacy, and resources mobilization.
S'agissant des défis, nous avons la
What about the
disponibilité.
challenges? Well, we have material availability and limited resources. We also have language issues. We have the physical access to some impacted communities. What about the lessons learned? Social immersion allows us to make a sustainable action. It allows us to target the poor people and to foster collaboration with women leaders. It also decreases the economic stress and favors community empowerment. And what about viewpoints? Well, we have three things. First, we supported the development and implementation of local development plans. We fostered exchanges of best practices among communities. And finally, we plan a good motivation for a proper involvement and commitment of the local authorities. That's all I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much. I wanted to say I'm sorry, I caught the flu recently and my voice is not that great. Don't worry and recover, obviously. Take care, Alexis. Should you have any question for Alexis, please write them down in the chat. We won't ask them now, but we'll have a Q&A session later on. Once again, thank you very much, Alexis Jetod. We'll get back to you during the Q&A session. We will now move on with Mali, the WASH cluster, with Mr. Sanusi Dotonatatu, who's the WASH cluster coordinator for Mali. Sanusi, are you there? Yes, I am here. I hope you hear me well. So I'm Sanusi Dotonatatu, WASH cluster coordinator for Mali. It is a shared pleasure for us to share with you our experience of Mali, especially when it comes to localizations. On the screen, you have a few figures about localization within the cluster. First, more than 50% of the members of the cluster are national and local stakeholders, be it national NGOs, state services, you name it. Then, within the coordination team of the cluster with the co-facilitator and so on, the co-lead is the government. So we have local stakeholders that are part of the local team. And when we look at the committee, which is the strategic body of the cluster, we notice that we have parity between the national and international NGOs. Indeed, we have two international NGOs that are there, and the state is well represented as well. With regards to the region, leadership coordination is ensured by the state at 100%, but we also have co-facilitators that are national NGOs. And this is something worth noticing. Now, what about the response and the actors that took part in it? Well, there were 62, among which 38 are national stakeholders. So it highlights how important national stakeholders are in the response. A few best practices when it comes to localization. With the coordination team, we work on the HPC planning. We have individual support that is organized with the local NGOs. So we meet with local NGO members. We help them work on their goal and so on. So we do a lot of advocacy as well. Advocacy for direct access to funding and to partnership for national NGOs with international NGOs and the United Nations agencies. And we were looking at how we could have parity between the international NGOs and the national NGOs. We also wanted to increase partnerships with international NGOs so that we could work on capacity building. Then we also organized support missions, capacity building in favor of the local humanitarian stakeholders. We also work on the leadership of the coordination teams at the regional level. We organize trainings on different topics, and national NGOs can participate in those trainings with the international NGOs. Next slide, thank you. What about the results and impacts? Well, we've already said a few words about the local stakeholders. They represent a majority of the members of the cluster. Within the regions, we created a space for co-facilitators that are only for national NGOs, and we have 5 dedicated co-facilitators for water and sanitation. Those 5 co-facilitators are local NGOs. We want the local NGOs to take part in the different working groups of the cluster. 2 of them, for instance, are working as co-leads within the working groups. We also give priority to the local NGOs when it comes to direct access to funding, be it through the humanitarian funds for Western Africa or Central Africa. Next slide, please. Finally, let me tell you a few words about the challenges and the next steps. We managed to create a space that is fully dedicated for the local NGOs. with dedicated co-facilitator roles. And to do that, we worked with different bodies, including UNICEF. And we are looking for funding for those NGOs to make sure that their work is sustainable. And that's one of the challenges. We want to make their work sustainable and to make sure they have a sustained access to funding. Then there's a weak capacity in terms of leadership and coordination. This is why we keep training local NGO members to leadership and coordination. What about the next steps? Well, we've been following the same logic. We want to keep working with co-facilitators, meaning and having local NGOs as co-facilitators. We'll also keep training the local and national NGOs in the future. That's briefly what we wanted to share about Mali. And should you have any question, I'd be happy to answer them during the Q&A session. Thank you very much, Sanusi. Indeed, we'll come back to you during the Q&A session. We will stick to Mali, and we will now give the floor to Christelle Serry, who's coming from the subcluster on GBV, gender-based violence in Mali. Christelle, you have the floor. Yes, thank you very much, Julie, dear colleagues, dear partners. Good afternoon. I'm Christelle Serry, coordinator of the subcluster for gender-based violence. We have also members from the GBV AoR that are present today in the room. Let me give you a few figures about localization in Mali. We have around 80 actors that are part of the subcluster on GBV. We have mostly local stakeholders, nearly 60%. We also have women local actors. They are the yellow dots on the map of Mali. So you can see that they are spread throughout the territory of Mali. What about coordination, co-facilitation of the GBV? Well, we have a co-lead that is the Ministry for Promotion of Women and Family. And we have the UNFPA, which is the co-lead as well. In some region, we also have at the Bamako level, for instance, 4 sub-national coordination, one in Tombouctou, one in Mopti region, one in Menaka, and one in Gao. Those sub-coordinations are co-led by the UNFPA and the Ministry for the Promotion of Women and Families. Within this framework, we've been working with different national stakeholders, including women's organizations that have been supporting us in this coordination process. Within our coordination process and our sharing of best practices, we've also carried out different activities, including coaching, mentoring, supporting for the national NGOs. We've organized and held different trainings on GBV, on GBV IMS. And every quarter, more or less, we hold a training to recycle the skills of the different stakeholders. Then in the HRP, we've been working with different local, national, international NGOs. We carried out a consultation process with the different stakeholders to update the activities based on the current situation. Wanted to know what suited best the current strategy. We also assessed the costs when it comes to the HNO, HAP strategy. Within, there's a planification process for 2024. We are also consulting different organizations, including civil society organizations, and building their capacities on advocacy. What about the results and the impacts? Well, I'll focus on the period from January 2023 to today. We have 150 local and international stakeholders that have been trained on protection, on GBV, on the reference system within the regions. We also organized webinars and coachings and reached out to 200 local stakeholders. Those webinars, for instance, were focusing on the drafting of codes of conduct for PSCA and AAP. Then we have FONGIN. FONGIN is the Federation of International NGOs with local partners. They've been trained on the basic concepts of VBGIE and the reference system. So we have a lot of people that have been trained by certified trainers. What about the challenges? Well, we have huge challenges when it comes to GBV. We have co-leads, as I said, and we need working on the technical support with the leadership of the ministry, which is not always present. We must reflect on a co-lead mechanism or scheme involving the local and organizations, including women's organizations. Could we have some of those stakeholders at the Secretariat? How can we make sure that they are heard within this system? Then there's a lack of funding. As Sanosu said, we are lacking funding. Only 8 organizations have been selected, including 2 local organizations, but we keep advocating with the humanitarian fund and other stakeholders to increase funding to SCOs and national NGOs. What about the next steps? Well, we must keep strengthening the technical, operational, and organizational capacities of the local stakeholders. We must strengthen the co-lead and the participation of the local organizations and increase direct funding and partnerships between national NGOs and international NGOs. We must also strengthen our collaboration frameworks with the different clusters and AoRs, areas of responsibilities. The goal is to put localization and women organizations at the heart of those clusters. And we've already tackled the issue in GBV, in WASH as well, on food security as well. And we are trying to strengthen the links with the health cluster as well. That's the situation as it is today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Christelle. Thank you very much for the great work you've been carrying out with the WASH cluster. Indeed, and that's an interesting question we had from Oswald in the chat. We have women's organizations that are included in the clusters, but when it comes to technical issues, maybe we are lacking women's organizations. So this would be an opportunity to increase the presence of women's organizations in the clusters. Now, we will give the floor to Ms. Bouari Bintou Samake, who's the president of WILDAF, Women in Law and Development in Africa, in Mali. Ms. Bouari Bintou Samake, you have the floor. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us to this meeting. I'm Ms. Bouari Bintou Samake, as you said, and I'm the president of WILDAF. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you today and to exchange with you. WILDAF is a Pan-African network aiming at promoting and protecting women and their rights. It was created in 1995 in Mali in order to empower women. We wanted to be the voice of women and girls that are facing violence. With WILDAF, we made sure that women and girls had access to justice. We are promoting peace and social cohesion in Mali. We have different strategies that are advocacy strategies, decentralized and national strategies. We are working, among others, on gender-based violence. The goal is to promote the rights of women and girls. We also involve the media in the promotion of women's rights. Among other strategies, we are fostering access to women to sexual and reproductive health and to justice. Among other strategies, we have the following. There you have the strategies, they are on the screen. We are strengthening involvement of the media, as I was saying. We are working on awareness raising of the men and boys. We also strengthen community advocacy platforms aiming at promoting standards behaviors and good behaviors in terms of gender. We also offer legal services to survivors and victims of gender-based violence.
So what does WILDAF do on... What does WILDAF do on coordination with the gender-based violence cluster? We are an active member of this AoR since 2014, and we are part of the trainers on the management of GBV following the IASC. We have also used the gender-based violence IMS tools and have been doing so since 2015. We are also part of the consultatory strategic committee for the draft law on GBV. And we also are beneficiaries of SURF funds. We are in touch with the government and work with the national program on the fighting GBV and do advocacy on this matter. What's more, we work with Niger and Togo, as well as Burkina Faso, on wedding of children and work with researchers at the university from these different countries. What's more, we have a partnership with the one-stop centers which work on providing legal support and creating bridges between victims and lawyers. We also do advocacy at the UN and are a bridge between the government and the UN when it comes to the sexual violences and conflicts. We have also been able to reinforce and empower 25 women leaders in Burkina Faso, and they have learned on tools when it comes to gender-based violence. What's more, we've been part of a study in Sahel with the African Union. So now, what are the good practices on localization? We first need funds to be mobilized and local NGOs need to carry out the activities. What's more, we see that leadership is reinforced through the reinforcement of capacities and tools coming from the international level. In layman's terms, the people try to learn how to use these tools which are at our disposal. And finally, we have sub-regional partnerships such as WILDAF with the rest of Africa to promote the rights of women and to work on different topics with 13 states in the sub-region. Now on the challenges when it comes to localization. First, we need to reinforce the institutional layer and work on human resources that need to be qualified. What's more, we need to understand the humanitarian architecture better, and we need also better involvement of the HNO and HRP processes, and we need to reinforce a common framework to mobilize resources. We have 5 commitments now, and we want to be involved from the beginning of the planification and conception, the planification cycle. We also want to have a mutual understanding. We want to organize meetings and sessions to share information. We also want a partnership and access to emergency funding. And fourth point, we need to reinforce capacities at the local level so that we can give the appropriate tools with adequate techniques we truly want to use on the ground with a technical support. And finally, we want a leadership from leading women in humanitarian coordination, because we need to be stronger in this humanitarian architecture and we need to be more involved in the cluster system. This will contribute, obviously, to reinforcing our activities and make us true leaders against GBVs. That's about what I wanted to say. These were the key elements on localization in our organizations for women and women's rights. And thank you very much for your attention. I am all ears to your questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madame Samake. A sheer pleasure to listen to you. We are very lucky to listen to a chair of a women organization. So thank you for being available today. Thank you, ma'am. Now, I will move on and give the floor to Father Paul Martin Bewar, and we will talk about the cluster in DRC. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. I am Father Paul Martin Mbewa. I am member of the coordination team for education in DRC. And we would like to talk about localization and share a few figures with you. In our country, there are 79% of partners who are local or national stakeholders, if you wish. We have a national NGO, which is part of the coordination team of the national cluster. And there are 2 national NGOs who are part of provincial coordination. Bearing in mind that we have 5 provincial clusters. 20% of NGOs are feminist NGOs, and 100% of the leaders or co-facilitators at the local levels are coming from the authorities and local NGOs. 79% of NGOs, according 69 rather NGOs are reporting partners and 52 are implementing partners. Most of the time, these NGOs have their own funds. Next slide, please. Now on good practices. We have initiatives in order to reinforce the capacities of local humanitarian actors. What's more, we have an advocacy for a direct access to funding and partnerships with international NGOs as well as UN agencies, and we have individualized support for national NGOs. Next slide, please. Go ahead. Next slide. Now on results and impacts. In 2022, the gap analysis of the capacities we needed on the ground, we can say that 42 central managers were trained on emergency situation and education. 44 members of national NGOs were trained on emergency situation, education. I think we have lost the speaker. And one core coordinator was trained, and at least 60 NGOs were trained on RRM. In 2023, we are losing the speaker again. In 2023, several trainings were held on data collection. There were trainings also in Nord Kivu and Ituri, and 23 agencies were trained, NGOs rather, were trained on AAP, and the commitment on education in emergency situation was reinforced in order to have more advocacy in favor of education in situation of emergency, with, for example, funding of the costs at the local level. Next slide. Now, challenges and next steps. On the challenges, local NGOs and government counterparts lack some capacities on leadership and coordination. As a consequence, we need to reinforce capacities at a local level and within the institution in order to improve coordination and leadership to maximize the efficiency and efficacy of the humanitarian response. Secondly, we need to work in order to define the co-lead positions for the coordination teams within the provisional clusters. That's what I wanted to share with you on our experience in DRC. Thank you very much. Thank you, Father. Very, very interesting. I'm certain we will have questions from the people here. Now, the last presentation on localization with EPA in Haiti, meaning WASH. So with Suleiman So, the coordinator for UNICEF. Over to you, Suleiman. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Julie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, dear colleagues, dear public. Thank you for giving me the possibility to take the floor. I'm taking the floor from Paris. I arrived here this morning from Haiti. I actually just flew in after 99 hours, so I may sound a bit tired to you, but anyhow, next slide. I would like to remind that I'm coordinator for WASH in Haiti. I just arrived at this position, but I can tell you that there is a lot of memory in our organization and the leadership is strong. I don't see the next slide. Could you please move on? Thank you. On the key figures for localization in IT, the WASH sector is steered by the National Direction for Drink Water, which is part of the Emergency Response Department of DINEPA. This is the national authority in charge since 2013. There are also 10 platforms for coordination at the subnational level. We have 10 departments in the Republic, and each department has a coordination platform if you wish. These are steered by local authorities, and it has been like that since 2013. What's more, we have 7 local stakeholders. This is less than Mali, and so 23% of the stakeholders fight against cholera and provide wash services to people who are displaced. What's more, we have 1 local actor in the strategic council for organization. It's the Red Cross of Haiti. Next slide. Now on the good practices for localization. Only, well, how shall I put it? There are many challenges in Haiti nowadays. 85% of the metropolitan area of Port-au-Prince, the capital, is controlled by gangs. But even though we are in this situation, the community-based organizations are deeply committed and they can work in these areas controlled by gangs in order to provide answers. And this allows to fight the weaknesses and the problems in the areas. On the coordination, after the earthquake in the southern part of the country in 2021, the response against this earthquake was completely coordinated by the local authorities on water and sanitation. I think that this is a completely unique experience. I can tell you that the earthquake was horrible, and it is one regional authority which coordinated the efforts. Next slide. Here you see the coordination architecture. I don't know if you will go on in the slides because there are animations, but anyhow, thank you. At the national level, you can see that we have the direction for answering emergencies, which steers everything with the support of other organizations. And you see the 3 resources of the government, which ensure coordination hand in hand with UNICEF. And so UNICEF is a co-lead and is an information manager as well, meaning that at this level on resources, well, and on staff, there are people from the government there in order to provide support to the sub-national level. On the regional level, we have the regional office for water and sanitation, and these regional bodies work with focal points from the direction to emergency situation response. And so we are talking about potential information management officers there and a colleague of UNICEF. And this regional level provides for a balance between government involvement and UNICEF involvement. Next level. At the level of the departments now, it's more or less the same. There is a balance resources-wise. Next part. We can go ahead. There is just one specificity. It is at the local level, at the level of the communities, that we are completely responsible with the government of steering the answers of the industry, but we also have community technicians on water and sanitations who are pivotal points for the community, the industry, and the other stakeholders upstreams. They do coordinate all the partners on the field, who you can see on this table on the right hand side, and they steer everything. And we can send information to the technicians to see what happens at this level. So this is a very interesting. If you wish, we can say that the architecture is quite centralized till the community level. And then at the community level, we truly want locals to be leaders. And you can see it with everything in red. And then we have the double mandate of the national entity to coordinate and provide an answer, if you wish. Some may say that this is not completely mainstream, but bearing in mind our context, it is key, it is quite practical, because we want the government to be more involved in emergency response mechanisms. So, in a nutshell, for development programs and for emergency programs, this is very good. Next slide.
Alors, les défis, bien sûr, nous en avons en fait.
What about the challenges? Well, we are focusing on disasters and emergencies. Contrary to other countries, we don't have humanitarian common funds or the fundings for local stakeholders. The DRU is steering the response, and we need to strengthen institutionally the DRU on the long term, with sustainable funding from UNICEF and other financial partners. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. And should you have any question, please fire away during the Q&A session. I would like also to apologize to the director of DRU who couldn't attend today's meeting. He was supposed to be there, but for scheduled issues, he couldn't attend today's meeting, and he asked me to apologize on his behalf. Thank you. Thank you, Suleiman. Thank you for this presentation. We will now move on to the Q&A session. I believe we received a few questions in the chat. Marie-Hélène, Davide, do you want to highlight some of the questions? I'll take one question from the chat, and then I see we have a hand raised. That's the one from Mr. Joseph. Yes. Good afternoon. Sorry, Mr. De Joseph. First, we'll take questions from the chat because they are questions that were asked a while ago, and then I'll give you the floor. Okay, no problem. So, Davide, Marie-Hélène, maybe you want to ask specific questions? Well, may I start and then I'll give you the floor, Davide? So the first question that was asked was coming from Lalou and Sue from Niger. How is the local language used in the coordination meetings? So are you using local languages? How do you deal with the people who don't understand the language? So that was a question for the colleague from the chat. Maybe I can do the different questions, or maybe one by one? Yes, one by one.
Alexis, vous êtes là?
Alexis, are you there? Yes, thank you very much for the question. With regards to the local languages, well, the local languages are used when it comes to data collection, primary and secondary data collections. These local languages are also used in workshops. When it comes to planning of the humanitarian needs and the humanitarian response, we may use local languages as well. In some of the humanitarian actions, we are also using local languages. So they are used widely in different meetings, consultation meetings as well. So we try to use local language at all levels.
Oui, je vais passer à la deuxième question. Alors, la deuxième
Maybe
question.
let's move on to the second question, which is for everybody. What's the level of representation of the women's organizations that are promoting gender equality and women empowerment within the clusters represented today? So this question is for all the speakers. Well, maybe I'll give the floor to the others first. Yes, sure. Or go ahead, Radha. Well, it varies. I would say it varies, depending on the cultural differences. In the Great South, for instance, level is quite acceptable. In the center, in the Sahelian area, the level is more or less acceptable as well. But when it comes to the extreme part of the country, the level is very low. But broadly speaking, at the macro level, I would say that a lot of things are going on. A lot of efforts are being deployed to improve the level of representation of the women's organizations. Thank you very much. Yes, I may pick up on that if I may. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this very relevant question. This is a reflection that we've launched at our own level. There are 7 local organizations that are represented at the sectorial level that have the goal of promotion of women. At the community level in Cité Soleil, for instance, so that's an example. I've been talking to community organizations within which I saw women, but I cannot give you a figure, so to speak. But I believe that it's mostly at the community level, at the WASH, in the WASH cluster, that we have organizations that are steered by women. So it's hard to give you a proper answer to your question, but that was a very good question. And this will be a priority for us in the future to increase the level of participation of women's organizations that are promoting gender equality and women empowerment in the different clusters. Thank you, Suleiman. We take note of your commitment. Yes, maybe let me add a few things about Mali. When it comes to WASH, to the WASH cluster, it's quite similar to what's going on in the IT sector. In the IT sector, we have more or less 44 local national NGOs that are active in the sector. They are taking part in the response and the coordination activities. Out of the 44, we identified only 2 or 3 women's organizations or women-led organizations. It's not a lot. As Julie was saying, this is one of the topics we will discuss with GBV. Because in GBV, there are a lot of women in organizations promoting gender equality and women empowerment, but in the other clusters, that's not always the case. So we will keep working with the GBV cluster to increase representation of women's organizations in all the clusters. We have a lot of national and local stakeholders, but not a lot of women's organizations. I would say we have 2 or 3 at the moment. So we'll try to improve that. Thank you very much for those answers. This is a very sensitive topic, especially for the the clusters that are not always women's led. Maybe let's move on to the next question from Mr. Joseph. Mr. Joseph, you have the floor. Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the different speakers. We are very interested in localization, and I have a question for you. You know, I've been listening to the different presentations. The speakers talked about localization, they gave some statistics. I wanted to know, in Mali and in the other countries, are there coordination structures for national NGOs? How are national NGOs channeling or gathering their voice to be heard? How are they conveying collectively their opinion, their advice? Is there such a structure in Mali and in the other countries? Because we talked a lot about the percentage of local NGOs in the clusters, but I wanted to know if there was a structure aiming at localization for national NGOs. Thank you, Joseph. So you're talking about maybe not a global structure, but a network, maybe a network of local organizations. Is there such a network? Well, I would say that the president of WILDAF, which is a network of women's organization, may be able to give you a hint about that. I don't know if other speakers, panelists would like to take the floor about that. Yes, thank you. Thank you. So indeed, they are networks. We set the goal to revitalize networks at the community level first. Those committees involve youngsters, and those youngsters, once we've started working with them, we train them on data collection with tools that the GBV subcluster is granting us. As a network, we have a centralization scheme that we use. And we send information to the subcluster GBV. The subcluster GBV is like the central collection data area. And we would like to strengthen this structure and expand it to the other regions of Mali. At the moment, we are collecting data in the areas that are more or less impacted by the conflict. However, we'd like to extend that to the other regions of Mali so that we can strengthen, support those local organizations with data collection. This is how we are working as a network on data collection within the subcluster on GBV. Maybe Christelle will add some things to what I said. Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Julia. I'll try to be brief. Indeed, beyond what's been said, we have the platform of national and local organizations that is operating at the level of Bamako, at the central level. And then, as I said during my presentation, we have a platform of international organization that exists as well within the humanitarian structure. Therefore, those two platforms are working together. They are involved in the humanitarian architecture, and they are consulted within planification on HNO HRP. It's true that we have women's organizations. We have locally rooted organizations that are working on risk prevention, for instance, and WILDAF is organizing those different stakeholders with the support of the subcluster. The goal is truly to work at the goal for us is to work at the subcluster GBV level. For us, having WILDAF or another women's organization at the regional level is also a way to create a bridge and to get the organizations closer to the public services. Thank you. Thank you very much, Christelle. Now we'll give the floor to Nina and Nandoro. Please go ahead. Yes, hello, I'm the coordinator of a national NGO in Chad. I'm in charge of child protection. Can you hear me properly? Yes, we do. I'm also working in a platform of national NGOs. Maybe a few observations before I ask my question. I wanted to say that the humanitarian format as it exists and as it's been existing when it comes to coordination over the past few years in terms of reporting and so on, doesn't always take into account the local stakeholders, be it the state, be it the national NGOs, be it the impacted communities. They are not heard in the humanitarian architecture. I feel like the local stakeholders are not taken into account because we have the UN bodies, international NGOs, and we are a bit silenced. I wanted to say that localization goes beyond capacity building. It goes also beyond the amount of local stakeholders that are participating in a cluster or are members of a cluster. We must keep focusing on the key aspects of localizations, which is access to funding, which is having power, so to speak, because I'm very happy, at the national level, there are good actions being carried out, but what's most important, what are the members that are taking part in high-level meetings on humanitarian actions? I would love to have women's organizations part of the leadership of those networks, because it's good to have participation. It would be even better to have leadership.
Du pouvoir en réalité. Donc peut-être que pour terminer, je serais très content.
It's often about power, and I would love to know whether there are strategies that have been developed to improve the vision of localization. What is the meaning of localization? What do we want to do together? The impacted communities, they are not involved in the coordination bodies. How can we involve them? That's my question, because we have local stakeholders, we have the state bodies, they are not involved enough, at least. So how can we involve the impacted communities and local organizations in the coordination? I believe this is the greatest challenge we are facing, to live up to the expectations of the communities, because localization for me is the impacted communities. We need to strengthen our capacity to bring answer, obviously, but it's about the power of the local communities. How can we strengthen their power? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this question. A lot of input. At the same time, you mentioned community engagement, community inclusion, which is sometimes different in the humanitarian area. And maybe I can send you the guide of the Standing Interagency Committee, which is not in French, unfortunately, but in English. It defines the framework of localization as this humanitarian world that works in silo, as you were saying. Maybe one of the panelists could talk a bit about a strategy of localization in one of the clusters and how it would look like. There's also Ben Munson who is asking for the floor. One of the Ben Munsons asking for the floor. Or maybe Sanusi. Yes, I wanted to pick up on that as well. Sure, Sanusi, then Bintu, then the next question. Yes, I'd like to pick up on that as well. Okay. Sanusi, very quickly. Yes. So I wanted to mention a few things. At the WASH level, there are indeed best practices when it comes to empowering the local stakeholders at the national, local level. We created a working group on localization in order to formalize, officialize all of this with a proper strategy to see how we can use what's already existing and move forward with localization. But I wanted to highlight one thing. In Mali, national NGOs are well represented, and when it comes to the 5 goals of the inter-country team we have, one of the goals is about localization, and it's a national NGO that is leading or guiding this goal. The goal is to develop a localization strategy for Mali. Then, beyond the platform of national NGOs at the national level, at the regional level as well, we have networks. So when we are going on a mission, we meet them, we try to carry out different analyses, see how we can support them through the different existing networks. And those networks, they are operational at the national level, and we are trying to use them. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Merci Sanusi. Bintou, vous vouliez répondre?
Thank you, Sanusi. Bintu, didn't you want to take the floor? Yes, thank you. I would like to build on that and say that, yes, but be brief, please. Yes, obviously. Just wanted to say that our network is made out of members in the different regions, and we also have focal points in these regions. And these women are anchored as leaders within communities. As a consequence, they are involved in raising awareness campaigns, orientation campaigns, and advocacy work at the local level. What's more, these women and the young leaders are supported by WorldDAF through actions to lever different mechanisms and truly carry out actions such as economic activities so that options appear and localization is possible. Thank you. Do we have one final person who wishes to take the floor? Yes, I also would like to answer to my colleague. On the planification of humanitarian needs with the provincial stakeholders. How does it work? Well, yes, of course there are ties. Of course there are ties with the provincial level. I just wanted to remind people that beneficiaries sometimes are passive. Okay. To build on what has been said and to talk about DRC. As my colleague has just said, everything stems from the field. When there is a need, a humanitarian need on the ground, We need to analyze it so that we can answer true needs and take action. If we lack a basis on the field, how do you want to ID issues, problems, needs? This is key and sounds quite obvious to me. If you don't start with the basis, you cannot find the needs. But if you start with basis, you can ID the needs and make them uh, come up in the decision-making processes. What's more, we have the national NGOs within the group who have many exchanges on IDs, on good practices, so that we know what we can improve, do better, so that we work more closely and indeed work upstreams to tackle issues before they arise, and so that whenever an issue arises, we can all take action together with more capacities, more means, with locals, for locals. Then also wanted to seize the opportunity to say that in DRC, local stakeholders are there, and 20% of NGOs are feminist NGOs, and they too play a key role, and we should have more actually. But let me insist on the fact that everything stems from the basis, and we need to reinforce capacities, we need to raise awareness so that everyone can be involved. We are the only ones who can take action, but we can only take action if we know our country, if we know our people, if we know what crisis can arise. But again, truly, we need the base, and we have it. It's the base which creates our work. Thank you, Father Paul Martin. This has been uttermost interesting. Many answers to our questions. Unfortunately, time flies by. I know there were two more questions. Sorry, gentlemen. Could you please write your questions in the chat, and we will provide you answers in writing after this meeting. Unfortunately, I will have to call it a day. So this has been a very interesting exchange. I would like to recap our exchanges. In a nutshell, we have noted many good practices. We do see that local stakeholders are there in working groups, in technical working groups, in the COSs, as we call them, the strategic orientation committees, in national organization. We do see they are co-leaders at the national level as well. This is quite good. There have been lots of progresses, even though we are not yet at, how shall I put it, levels we are aiming at, but localization is work in progress. What's more, we have noted quite a lot of practices related to training, coaching, and training with local NGOs and international NGOs, and both ways, because local NGOs have quite a lot to teach to international NGOs as well. I also want to say that when it comes to HRO and NP drafting, a lot of progress has been accomplished, but there are challenges related to specific budgets, namely for local NGOs. But this unfortunately depends a lot on fundraisers, even though coordination teams work a lot on advocacy in that sense. Then there are also some challenges related to languages. We have seen that sometimes some clusters use local languages, but sometimes this practice was not widespread throughout the countries. Then another thing, a challenge and a success at the same time in Mali, the networks of NGOs to carry a voice, to leverage more and weigh more, namely with women organizations. We have seen that this works for local NGOs in clusters and with coordination platforms. And then a localization strategy, which is a bit clear, because we've seen many figures. This being said, there are localization strategies which are being developed with practical actions, which include community organizations, the beneficiaries, and also local organizations. That's about it, and I will leave the last 2 minutes to Michelle if she's amongst us so that she can close this webinar. Michelle, are you there? Yes, I am. Do you hear me? Yes, we do. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I was delighted to listen to you all, to hear about all these good practices and experiences. This exchange has been very interesting. We've had many exchanges on your experiences. So thank you to all the panelists, spokesperson. Thank you for sharing your successes on leadership, on participation and involvement of NGOs, local NGOs in coordination structures. I do know there are still a lot of questions pending. I know there is still a lot of work to carry out on funding resources and power for local NGOs, but I do hope that you too have gathered new ideas and strategies here in order to create new pathways in order to promote participation and leadership from the local level. So that's about it. Thank you very much. I have listened to a lot of very interesting things. I know there is a lot of work to carry out, but I'm convinced that together we can indeed go ahead and change the future. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you, Michel, and thank you to all our presentators today, Alexis Jetod. I would also like to thank Sanusi from Mali, Christelle Sely, also from Mali, the chairperson of WIDAF, Madame Samake, and Père and Father Martin, and finally Suleiman So from WASH in IT. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the Global Coordination Cluster Group for their support. And thank you. Thank you very much. The interpreters wish you a lovely afternoon. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Merci,
Au
au
revoir.
revoir, merci.
Ok, au revoir.
Au revoir.
Bye.
Merci, au revoir. Au revoir, chers collègues.
Au revoir. Bye.
Bye bye. Au revoir.